Tilly! So today I wanted to talk about all the books that I've read in January, and because it's a lot to talk about, I'm gonna jump right in. So the first book that I finished this year, or in January, it's kind of odd to say this year, anyway, is The Face on Your Plate, The Truth About Food by Jeffrey Musave Mason. There's two S in there, so it shouldn't be Mason. Masson? I have no idea. Anyway, I talked about this book more in my last video, where I reviewed 4 food-related books. And so if you want to know more about that, I can totally link the video right here. But it's a food. No, it's not. It's a book about food, and especially about vegan food, and about what meat-eating diets and animal agriculture and factory farming does to or do to our environment, to our bodies, to the animals themselves. It's a little bit about, moral questions and all of that as well. So it was very interesting, very scientific and well structured, and it was just a really great read. So then the next book that I picked up was Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which I've never read because I didn't read in school, because Germany sucks and teachers don't really pick the best literature and poetry to read in class. So we've never read it, and I wanted to pick it up because it's a classic, and I want to read way more classics, especially the books that, American and Canadian students read in school. So I picked it up, and I read it in like a day or two, so I'm sure you know what it's about because you've probably read it. But it's 12 or so boys who get stranded on an island, and they kind of create their own little society, and they try to cope by, going hunting and gathering food and then making shelter, and they kind of have their little tiny version of society, and it's about how those boys live on that island. There are so many symbols and so many different levels to that story that I actually did quite a lot of research on what it means beneath the adventure story of boys being stranded on an island. So it's a lot about, what human nature and what human instinct is about, and how, our society kind of marks us and influences us as people. So I would totally understand why you would read this in school, because there's so much to interpret and analyze and stuff like that. But it was really cruel at times, and especially, the times where they had to kill a pig and stuff like that. It kind of made me cringe, and I don't know, it's just, I totally get that they had to survive and eat and stuff, but it just kind of made me a little sad. So then the next book that I read is Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor, which is the second book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I've read Daughter of Smoke and Bone last month, I'm pretty sure, or in November, anyway, and I really, really liked it, and now this is a sequel. I can't really tell you much about what happens because it's a sequel, but it's, so Daughter of Smoke and Bone is the story of Karoo. I didn't want to give anything away, so I just want to say what's on the blurb of Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and it says, it's a sweeping and gorgeously written modern fantasy about a forbidden love, an ancient and epic battle, and hope for a world remade. And that's the best description that I could have not come up with. So yeah, it's a story about angels and demons and this one girl who's kind of involved in both. I can't wait to read Dreams of Gods and Monsters, which is on my TBR for February, so I'm really stoked. Also, a lot of people say that the second and third book are way better than the first book, which I totally sort of agree with, but I also really love the first book, so it's not that big of a deal for me. Alrighty, then the next book that I read was The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. And I picked that book up because Reagan from Peru's project talked about it, all the time. And it took me forever to get through, because for me it was really slow burning, really not very suspenseful story, so it was really easy for me to just put down and just kind of leave there for a day and read something else. But basically it's a story of Harry August, who, whenever he dies, he gets born again in the same circumstances that he was born at first. So he always he lives in a loop and lives his life endlessly, pretty much. But of course he remains his knowledge of his former lives, so then when he gets born the 5th time or something, he's still, he's a kid, but he knows everything of those former 5 lives. And then a little girl comes to him and says that the world is ending, that he has to do something about it. And that's pretty much what the story sets off. And what I really liked about this book is that it wasn't chronologically written. It's not this is the first life, this is the second life. Okay, this couch is But it's kind of like all over the place and back and forth, and that kind of made it more interesting. At times confusing, but I really, really enjoyed it. And then the end was kind of not disappointing, but not as like wow, boom as I had thought it would be. But I still really, really liked it, and I'm like a sucker for time travel stories, so I really, really enjoyed that book. And then the next book that I read, I just kind of picked up randomly from the library because it was sitting there, and I've never read a book by Patrick Ness, and that's A Monster Calls. My cat is very curious about furniture, and he's not allowed on there. Corky! So pretty much the story is about Connor, who who has nightmares every night, and then one night a monster appears, and he's not quite sure if it's real or not, or if it's just a nightmare as well. And his mom is dying of cancer, and that's all I'm going to tell you about this. It's the most tragic and engaging and suspenseful and just gripping story I've read in a while. I loved it. I would have never ever thought that this book would end up meaning so much to me, because in the beginning you kind of just think, it's kind of a monster story and it's kind of cute and whatever. But it gets so deep and thoughtful, and I can absolutely understand why people love Patrick Ness that much, because it was amazing. It was such a great read. So then the next book that I picked up is also a very short one, and that's Wait by Jeanette Winterson. It's also my first book of Jeanette Winterson that I've ever read, and it's part of the Canongate Myth series that also has Girl Meets Boy by Ellie Smith, and some book by Margaret Atwood that I'm also going to read. So it's pretty much retellings of myths in different settings or in the modern times. She didn't actually change the setting or didn't wrap it in a way that, for example, Ellie Smith did, but it was really, really interesting. It was kind of disturbing at times and kind of like, what? Like, why are you writing this? And in other times it was really beautifully written and really like quotable. So it was kind of back and forth. The story itself wasn't super different because it was just kind of the myth and then with a slightly different ending. Slightly. It was really inspiring, and it was a very fast read, so I can't complain about whatever the depth of the story because it was very short. I think it was under 200 pages. And then I went to a secondhand bookstore and I just randomly looked through the poetry section, and I picked up Selected Poems by T.S. Eliot, who is very popular, and I've never read a single poem by him. This includes The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It includes, what's the other really popular one? The Wastelands and The Hollow Men. I really enjoyed reading his poetry, even though I had to do so much research and read analysis. What's the plural of analysis? I had to do a lot of research afterwards and kind of check which references I didn't get and see the historical setting of all of these poems and kind of like the whole background to fully understand it, but I still really enjoyed it, especially because it kind of made me feel like I was in school again, and I had to, write an interpretation of poems that were written in a different time period. So I really liked that. My favorite one by far was Journey of the Magi, which is pretty much the travel of the three kings to the birth of Jesus, and in the end, he kind of asked himself if they were just witnessing a birth or a death, which I thought was really cool. It just kind of spoke to me most. But all the other ones were really, really depressing. And then 3 more books, bear with me. The next one that I read was Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider. I was going to say Schneider, that's so German. Anyway, Poison Study follows the character of Yelena, who is a murderer, and she can pretty much choose if she wants to die instantly or if she wants to become the new poison tester of the commander. I want to say king commander. So she has to taste his food every time he eats and test if it's poisoned or not. And I think I don't want to tell you more about that, but it's an amazing book. It's the first book in a trilogy, so I'm really excited to read the next 2 books because it just kind of halfway through it just kind of, took off, and they were relationships that are really quirky, really surprising, and the character development was amazing, and I just kind of fell in love with it. Then another nonfiction book that I picked up from the library is Headstrong, 52 Women Who Changed Science and the World by Rachel Swaby. I kind of, sort of didn't read every single one, but it's pretty much 52 autobiographies. That's not even possible. It's 52 biographies of women in science and different fields of science who changed the world and aren't really known for that. So other than Marie Curie, we can't really name female scientists, but they've made such a big difference, and they're just kind of buried under the fame of men. So I wanted to pick this up because it was really like an interesting concept, but because the whole book was about 52 different women, it was only 2 to 3 to 4 pages per person that really explained what she did. So it was really short and really just kind of a little snippet of her life. I think it would have been better if she maybe focused on 20 scientists and kind of elaborated on their life a little bit more, because this way they all kind of blur together because you didn't really connect to the person. But it was still very interesting, and I guess it's a point to start for further research if you want to get into the research of female scientists. I don't know. But I'm still really glad that I picked it up. And then the last book that I finished, that I technically finished on the 1st of February, but I didn't want to not talk about it now because I'm going to have forgotten about everything once I do my February wrap-up, is The Edible Women by Margaret Atwood. It's not my first Margaret Atwood book. I really, really like her. I really love the Oryx and Crake trilogy, even though I didn't really get through the third book. Corky. He's just eating random shit all the time. Okay, The Edible Woman is about Marion, who, in the back, it says she has a problem. She is a willing member of the consumer society in which she lives, but suddenly finds herself identifying with the things being consumed. So pretty much every time she eats something, she thinks of herself in that role. Like when she eats a steak, she's like, oh my god, this was an animal, this was a living being. How can I eat this? It was written in 1994 or something. It's pretty old. 69? Are you kidding me? Wow. It was written in 1969, and it's Margaret Atwood's first novel. So I was really excited to pick it up because I kind of thought that in the end it kind of ended with her being a vegetarian or vegan, which, to kind of be honest, that's not something that in the 1960s, 70s, 60s, 70s was a big deal back then, I'm pretty sure. But first, it was interesting, let's put it like that, but nothing happened until page 200 or something, so the whole I'm identifying with my food didn't actually happen until about page 200. I guess because it's such an old book, there are a few things that just wouldn't be written in a modern book, like some pages were kind of homophobic where I read it and I was like, are you kidding me? And then also the end was kind of not satisfactory to me, to be honest, and it wasn't what I expected, but I'm still glad that I read it. Like, it was still interesting, and it was kind of an easy book to read, I guess. Like, it wasn't super deep. Okay, one last book that I only read half of that is gonna shock you all. I read Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and I've only heard good things about this book. So I picked it up, and it took me about 3 weeks to get through half of it, and now I'm just kind of not gonna finish it because I like the story, I like the plot, it's interesting, but I can't identify with any of the characters, I can't relate to them. Might be because it's written in the third person, and because maybe they're all criminals, so maybe I can't relate to them that way. Maybe it's just not the right book for me, or maybe not the right time for me to read it right now, but I stopped at 270. Once again, I feel like the thing that is promised to us is 6 dangerous outcasts, 1 impossible heist. The heist still hasn't happened yet, so I'm kind of just waiting, and there's so much traveling and so much backstory, and I was kind of just like, get to it. So, I don't know, it's definitely not for me. I know this book has had such a hype, it was so hyped, but it's just not for me. Alrighty, this is way longer than I thought. I thought I'm gonna be like super quick with all the books, but it definitely wasn't. Anyway, I did read a lot, so I guess I wanted to talk about every book a little more. I hope that it was kind of interesting, and I would like to know which books you've read in the last month, or if you have any recommendations for me. Alrighty, I hope that you're all doing well, and I will see you next time. Bye.